Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started here in just about another minute or so. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to wait about 30 more seconds, and then we're going to get started because we have a great presentation lined up, and I want to give our presenters as much time as possible. All right, we're going to begin. I want to alert you that this session is being recorded, and sessions will be available at some point after the conference if you want to go back and watch this one again or watch any of the other sessions. Those will be available following the conference. Thank you. Welcome to the PDG B-5 Governance Learning Session. Today's session's title is Revisiting Early Childhood Governance, Present and Future Perspectives. And before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. So those of you who have joined our conferences several times know that the first thing we request, if you haven't already done so, is to please change your name in Zoom. Share your first and last name, and please identify the state that you're from. That's especially helpful when we're asking questions or networking later on in the session. It helps us know where each person is from, and that's a nice goal. If you see somebody you want to connect with later, that gives you a state to connect them with. You can see the instructions on there. I don't think I'll go through that. Find those three little dots by your name, rename, first and last name. If you have any questions, please side chat us and we can help you with that. All right, next, if you did call in on your phone and you're on screen on your computer, there is a way that you can link your screen to your phone so that when you're talking, your audio and your visual sync. And if you see switch to phone audio, you click on that, and then it will give you instructions of a screen on how to dial in with the, what do they call that? Your participant ID, so that your audio and your screen will link. Again, if you have any questions with that, give us a side chat. During the session, please use the chat to ask questions and present ideas. We welcome your input and your feedback. That's one of the goals of this session, is that it's interactive. Please do mute yourself when you're not speaking so that we can be sure and hear our speakers while they're presenting. All right, as I said, the title of today's session is Revisiting Early Childhood Governance, Present and Future Perspectives. In this session, you will hear from national experts, Dr. Lynn Kagan and Dr. Rebecca Gomez, as they reflect on governance models and the evolution of early childhood education governance practices since the inception of the preschool development grant Birth to 5. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Pull this down so you can see their faces while I tell you just a little bit about them. This is the tip of the iceberg. We're so honored and thrilled to have them both here today. Sharon Lynn Kagan is the Virginia and Leonard Marks Professor of Early Childhood and Family Policy. She's the co-director of the National Center for Children and Families at Teachers College at Columbia University and professor adjunct at Yale University's Child Studies Center. So I'm convinced she does not sleep. She wears a lot of hats. She has helped shape early childhood practice and policies throughout the United States and has worked with UNICEF, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Bank in 75 countries around the world. She's an expert on what's going on in early childhood across the world, not just across the country. She's the author of 250 articles and 18 books, and recognized for her path-breaking practical and theoretical work on early childhood systems, school readiness, standards and assessments, and advancing the development of the field of early childhood policy. Dr. Kagan is a Fulbright Scholar, an elected fellow of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, and a member of the National Academy of Education. She is also the only woman in American history to have earned its 3 most prestigious educational awards: the Distinguished Service Award from the Council of Chief State School Officers. I always have to think twice when I say their name, CCSSO, the James Bryant Conant Award for Lifetime Services to Education from the Education Commission of the States, and the Harold W. McGraw Jr. Prize in Education. Very pleased to have Dr. Kagan here. Next, Dr. Rebecca Gomez is a program officer for the education program at the Heising-Simons Foundation. And you all are very familiar with that foundation, as they really are investing generously in the field of early childhood and in early childhood policy. Prior to joining the foundation in 2016, Rebecca was an assistant research professor at Rutgers University National Institute for Early Education Research, where she led the State of Preschool Yearbook data collection and analysis team. And she provided technical assistance to states via the Center for Enhancing Early Learning Outcomes, or CELO, as many of you know them. Rebecca also served as a graduate and postdoctoral research fellow at the National Center for Children and Families at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she conducted domestic and international research on early childhood systems, with a particular focus on governance and professional development. Rebecca is a former board member of the National Association for Education of Young Children. She earned an EDD in curriculum and teaching, with a concentration in early childhood policy from Columbia University, master's in early childhood policy from the University of New Hampshire, and a bachelor's in American Studies at Rutgers University. And I think last, but very importantly, she began her career in early education as a preschool teacher. So it's fantastic to have both of these speakers here. And without further ado, I will turn the stage over to Rebecca. Are you leading us off? I think we've.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah, for that really kind introduction. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I know it is a crazy time, and we are glad you've taken some time out to contemplate governance with us. So I'll get us started and then turn it over to Lynn pretty quickly. But before I dig into the content, can everybody see the PowerPoint as a slideshow? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Thumbs up. Okay, I see a thumbs up from Deborah. All right, so I'm gonna assume we're good. And actually, we at the 11th hour retitled this presentation in part because we have been doing some really what I think is new and exciting thinking that was prompted by how we sort of dig into the past, present, and future on governance, and really hopefully give you an opportunity to think with us about ways that you can use this thinking about governance to help redesign your mixed delivery systems as a part of the PDG B-5 grant. So our title has changed. The spirit of the original title remains. And without further ado, we'll dig into it. So here's a bit of a roadmap for where we'll go today. Parts 1 through 6 will reground us in systems thinking, which is some of that past that the original title talks about, while distinguishing governance from systems and focusing on a new approach to thinking about governance, which we sort of glean from the literature, but also see a lot of emerging thinking happening in the field. So we tried to capture some of that. That's about 55 minutes of our time today. And then in part 7, we have designed an activity that we hope will help you begin to dig into how you might design an approach to governance for your state, territory, or tribal nation. And we've allocated about 25 minutes for that activity, give or take. So in part 1, we're really going to talk about the whys and whats of systems thinking, as this header suggests. And the reason that we do this is to refresh in your minds the lineage that informs the PDG Birth to 5 grants, and to explicate the ways that this work is always evolving and highly context dependent. And when I say context, I'm including the ethos of the day, the individual and collective political, social, and economic context in which each of your state PDG teams are working, and broader effects. And governance happens in these evolving contexts. So if we don't know the history and we don't really think about sort of systems and how the evolution of systems thinking in our field has brought us to where we are on governance now, we're at risk of repeating it. So we can take what we've learned and refine it over time. And that's the goal of what we'll talk about today. So what's happening now, as you all know, probably pretty well, we're still in the midst of COVID relief and recovery. We have an historic investment in the early childhood field because of the American Rescue Plan. And all of you are working on elements, I'm sure, of the implementation of that and the intersection of that work with your planned Birth to 5 PDG Birth to 5 grants. We have a huge possibility of more durable and even more historic investment in early childhood if we can get the Build Back Better agenda approved, likely through reconciliation. And so all of this is uncertain. You're all working on managing your early childhood systems, thinking about how to build more equitable and responsive mixed delivery systems amidst this context. Undergirding all of this, as you, I think, probably well know because you're living it, we have right now sort of limited funding. We don't have a durable strategy for things like workforce compensation. There's a lot of ambiguity about what governance is and what it can do. We have a lot of programs, a lot of funding streams, a lot of different services that we're trying to manage and bring together in a systemic way. And that's really chaotic. And oftentimes families, the workforce, and others experience that as chaotic and inequitable. And so it's really thinking about how can we move from this still fragmented emerging systems approach into a more coherent approach, and do this while capitalizing on many of the opportunities that are presented here today. So that's why we're here. And I'm going to turn it now to Lynn.
And Lynn, before you start, we have a few people in the chat that are still having a little bit of trouble with their size of their slides.
Okay, so I may ask our tech support person to weigh in here, but I believe you can adjust your screen. If you look at the green bar at the top of your screen, you should have a little tab that says View Options. And you can click on that to try and make it fit your screen.
Hey, Rebecca, this is Christy Cowers.
Hey.
When you do that, the slide actually leaves the screen.
That's weird.
I found if the little hand, I don't know what to call it, cursor comes up and I could pull the screen then into my view. So I did have that problem too.
I'm going to give people a minute or so to try that.
And while we're troubleshooting, I've got a very interesting artistic red circle on my screen. Does anybody else have that? Right in the middle?
Also have that. I thought you had done that on the last slide, Lynn, to articulate a point. So
no, I didn't.
I also see that somebody was, I think, annotating.
That's funny.
Let's see if I can.
Can we erase? I don't even know how it got there.
I was able to clear it.
Bravo.
Okay, I'm
ready when you'd like me to go.
Christy, were you, just since you shared your tech issues, were you able to troubleshoot it by clicking and dragging? Should we try something else or should we move on?
Just
I
click
wish
on
I
the
could
black
say yes,
area.
but it's not working.
Click on the black area and then drag it up or down till you see the full PowerPoint slide.
I think Harriet may have had a suggestion, Rebecca. It's in the chat.
Right, Rebecca, my idea is if you have a link, you could just drop it into the chat and then people could look at the slides, separately, since people are having a hard time, some people being able to read them in their current size.
Mm. Okay, I will.
When we do get them sort of anchored, then it seems to move away again. So I don't know if there's,
This is so weird.
It's very weird because we did troubleshoot it before. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. Well, and now it's not letting me exit out of full screen. Is this better?
Now I have lost it totally.
Hmm. Okay.
I had to drag mine down.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I don't have, now I've got a fully black screen.
All right, let me
Oh,
stop
there,
sharing.
there. It just it came back.
All right, I'm sorry for the silence. I'm trying to troubleshoot this in real time and find a way to get you this
Well,
PowerPoint
Harriet's idea work
slide.
of,
Yes, I
chat?
believe so.
no?
Yeah, I think so. I just need to
Okay.
get into our shared drive so I can get the link and share it with you all. So just give me 1 second to do that. It is a fairly large PowerPoint file, so I'm putting it in the chat now, but just know that it might take you a minute to download it if you want to do that in real time.
But I hate for people not to be able to see it as we're talking.
I know, I'll
I
put
guess
it back up, but at least you have
Yeah, try it again.
access to it. Okay, what do we see now?
Lynn can see it fine.
Okay, why don't we do this, Lynn? Do you want to
Mhm.
take us through it while hopefully people either can see it or they're downloading it?
Okay, what about others?
Okay, see
Oh,
it
good,
says
Laurie can see it. Okay,
people
good.
can see it.
Yeah,
That
okay,
worked. Okay,
okay,
all right,
okay.
so we'll keep going.
I
Sorry
see.
about that.
Mm.
The best laid plans. I don't know what that phrase is, but that seems to be happening to us here.
In a way, it's a really good metaphor for systems work. That we always kind of think we've got it nailed, and then lo and behold, something happens and we really realize that we don't. And where we would like to begin is kind of taking a quick road tour of where we've been on systems work. And we are positing that there have been 4 stages, and that actually we're at the 5th stage, and it's excitedly ours to craft. Could we have the next slide, please? So we'd like to begin with stage 1, which we've named Julie Sugarman's seminal work. And this dates all the way back to the 1980s. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know, Julie Sugarman was actually a lead federal employee in HEW when it was HEW, and actually was very involved in overseeing the beginning of Head Start within OCD. As his career evolved, however, he recognized that we were funding multiple programs, that things were really not working together, And he kind of took the word system and ran with it. However, his understanding of a system was actually, in retrospect, although avant-garde for the time, in retrospect, somewhat limited. He said that there was no hope of creating a new entity, but it was really creating maybe a coordinator, having some backup services, and developing some common standards for programs, and for, interestingly, doing some planning across the different providers of programs. So stage one was very, very, very embryonic and didn't take us very far in our conceptual thinking. Next slide, please. That led us to stage two. There was a very strong sentiment in the 1990s that things were really stuck in the field. And Carnegie and 4 or 5 major foundations got together and funded an initiative called Quality 2000. It was setting goals for the year 2000. It involved, next slide, please, about 350 people in the field. And that project came up with a metaphor that looked like flowers and gears. Some of you may have seen this before, but what it posited was that indeed our policy structure was planting individual programs as represented by the flowers. So we had high quality family support and family literacy programs, high quality HQ Head Start, high quality childcare. You get the idea that everybody was planting their own little patchwork of programs. Unfortunately, like a garden, when you overplant the flower, when you overplant anything without taking cognizance of the infrastructure, those things die. And the metaphor was that we were focusing so much on programs that indeed the quality, the equity, and the sustainability of the programs was indeed not thriving. And so Quality 2000 called for a focus on what they labeled the infrastructure way back then. Next slide, please. And next one. And they defined the infrastructure as a set of interlocking subsystems that involve the development of quality pedagogy, regulations, worrying about financing, and there's governance right there up at the top, professional development, a lot to do with assessment and guidelines and monitoring, parent and family and community engagement, and of course, linkages to schools and community health. Next slide, please. Albeit this mixed metaphor of the flowers and the gears, we've got the natural environment of the flowers and the mechanistic environment of the gears, we felt needed to go together, and so created 2 attendant formulas. One was that you couldn't have a system unless you addressed the flowers, and the flowers or the programs wouldn't live unless you addressed the gears or the infrastructure. And the corollary equation was that if you took away any one of those, any one of the 8 elements, you ended up with nothing. Next slide, please. People moved forward with their thinking and decided that what we really needed was a bit of a broader conceptual framework, and the build ovals were postulated, and I know everybody is probably familiar with these. Next slide, please. And the build ovals stated that we couldn't just focus on an early learning system if we really were concerned with children's development, but we needed to be cognizant of health, mental health and nutrition, family support, special needs, and early intervention. Next slide, please. Thank you. And attendant to the build ovals, there was a recognition that these mega system also needed attention to governance standards, planning and monitoring, elements of the gears that were represented earlier. Next slide, please. All of this was really wonderful until stage 4 came along, when we actually got some funding via the Early Learning Challenge Fund in 2011 to, next slide, please, to posit, and this is taken directly, you all will recognize that the goal was in the yellow circle, promoting outcomes for children, and that there was an assumption that we needed successful state systems. And the Early Learning Challenge Fund further elaborated on the gears and specified these 7 elements, you will see that they look remarkably familiar to that original formulation. Next slide, please. But we were left with a really big bunch of questions. So we've got all these different ideas about a system. What should we use? How do we really go about creating it? These were devoted to describing it, but how do we create it? Where do we begin? Is there a specific order that the work should proceed in? So next slide, please. We find ourselves here in need of a little bit of a new approach, one that is really focused on implementation. And Rebecca and I are pleased to offer this. Please understand this is very embryonic. It's new thinking for us, so we'll be very anxious for your reactions, and will be a lot of opportunity to provide that. But basically, next slide, please. Stage 5, there we go, to implementation of systems. This is kind of where we are right now. Next slide, please. We are suggesting that much of the work that we see going on in the field begins at what we have labeled step 4, that really is focused on designing some sort of a structure. And our work and experience working with many of you and working internationally suggests that we need to say, whoa, a bit and step back. And so we are suggesting a 4-step process as of now. The first step, and we will elaborate on all of these, but the first step is really to define what we're talking about. What is the unit of analysis? The second step is to focus on governance, because we do feel it is a preeminent gear, and more specifically to focus on the functions of governance. Step 3, we think there's a lot that can be learned from looking at states around the United States, but also at other countries, and then move to step 4, which is designing the structure. So I'm going to take you through step 1. Rebecca's going to do step 2. I'm going to do 3, and she's going to do step 4. And then hopefully we're all going to get to work together. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So what do we mean by unit of analysis? What are they talking about? Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. We want to suggest that the unit of analysis is very, very confusing. And until we reach coherence on that, and by the way, coherence would be within a given state or within a given entity that is trying to establish a governance function. But for purposes of this, we are really talking about the states, and we want to suggest that there are 4 different units of analysis that you might consider. Next slide, please. We see these as being somewhat nested, and we're going to talk about all 4, but let me point out that 1 is in peach, 2 are in blue, and 1 is in gold, and those are not arbitrary color selections. You'll understand why we did it that way as we go to the next slide. Let me begin with the pedagogical learning system. The unit of analysis always addresses who and what are we including, what falls under our umbrella. And for this system level, we're really talking about children birth to 8. And we're really talking about what goes on in classrooms or in family childcare homes. So think about that entity where the teacher engages or the adult engages with the children as the unit of analysis in a pedagogical learning system. And this pedagogical learning system has indeed very clear goals. It wants to align approaches to pedagogy, to learning experiences, and to content for young children across both the age span 0 to 8 and across diverse entities. And it postulates, and in order to do that, there are very clear elements. You need early learning and development standards. You need a curriculum that focuses on all dimensions of learning. You need to make sure that the pedagogy is aligned as children move from preschool into primary. You need to make sure that there are child-appropriate formative and summative assessments, and we need to plan for transition. It's a great big circle that looks something like the next slide, please. So these build on each other, and we believe that in order to have a sound pedagogical and learning system, and by the way, at the core of every single early childhood program is a pedagogical learning system. So that's part one. Unit of analysis 2 talks about the early education system. Notice that we have a light blue circle here. In this case, the early education system really focuses on children ages 3 to 8, and is primarily concerned with educationally oriented settings like pre-kindergarten classrooms, Head Start classrooms, preschool programs, and even schools, the early years of schooling. So the unit of analysis 3 to 8 in educationally oriented settings. The next slide, please. This is an early care and education system. Notice it is a darker blue. Its unit of analysis is different. It focuses on children, not 3 to 8, but birth to 8. It focuses on diverse settings and programs that may include childcare, home visiting, pre-kindergarten, Head Start, and preschool programs. Next slide, please. Irrespective of whether you are focusing on the unit of analysis that is characterizing early education systems or early care and education systems, the two different ones is represented by the two blue circles, the goals and the elements are really all the same. That our goal is to create an aligned system so that all the services provided are aligned, that they are high quality, that they are equitably distributed, that they are continuous, and that they are fully supported. And to do that, the elements that are needed are many of those same elements that have been expressed throughout our long history. Next slide, please. To reaffirm the point, we want to say that an early education system is distinct from an early care and education system because its units of analyses are different. Nonetheless, what is common are the goals and the elements. Making this distinction is really important and is part of discerning the unit of analysis of step 1. Next slide, please. Again, both of these rely on the idea of multiple programs coming together, supported by an appropriate infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now, the larger and the last of the 4 units of analysis we are presenting really talks about a service system, and we might name it a comprehensive service system for young children. It really talks about serving children birth to age 8, but unlike the early care and education system that also serves children birth to age 8, it says that fundamentally we have to support health, development, learning through a broad array of services. Its goal is to provide a model or an approach for an ideally integrated system of services for young children. It uses and focuses on, as in the build elements, all the elements that we were talking about. There isn't much controversy anymore on those, but it extends to include a very broad array of programs and services. Next slide, please. So this 4th unit of analysis really builds on the build approach and says that we are trying to create a very comprehensive system for very, very young children. I hope the distinctions between those 4 are clear, and we can come back if there are questions later. Next slide, please. But here's the really big secret, not so much a secret, but the really big important point, that once you define your unit of analysis, that regardless of what it is, it rests on solid governance. that all those systems need a coherent system of governance that may look different depending on which of the 4 circles you are in, but indeed that does focus on the systemic element of governance. So our thesis is, step 1 is defining the unit of analysis, recognizing that governance is the pivotal element of the infrastructure. Next slide, please. And now to talk about governance and all of its functions, Rebecca.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So we are going to focus on functions for a little while, and I'll preview for you that the work that we want you to do in small groups, and I'm hoping that our tech challenges didn't derail that time, will be focused on some of these functions. So you'll have an opportunity to think about this 4-step process. We'll give you a unit of analysis, and you'll get to kind of play around with some of the functions that we're going to talk about now. I think the biggest thing that we want to say is that the purpose of governance really is to integrate and knit policy across different subsystems or policy entities, and that will change a little bit depending on your context. So I didn't just put a skeleton in here because it's seasonally appropriate, but if we think about governance as sort of the backbone or the skeletal system, if you will, to make sure that governance works to ensure that system integration is occurring. And if there's a disconnect, there's sort of someone paying attention to that whole skeleton to fix it. The analogy that I give is that when I tore a calf muscle earlier in the year, and I thankfully got sent to a really good physical therapist who could have just focused on that calf muscle and sort of compartmentalized my training and healing, but actually did a functional analysis and observed that I had a compensation in my hip. So I was putting too much stress on my calf, right? So he's sort of looking at the whole body, the whole system, and thinking about what needs to be tweaked or stabilized in real time. So if we think about some of these complex problems that you all are dealing with in the Birth to 5 grant, in your broader early childhood systems writ large, things like stabilizing the workforce, things like racial equity, and doing an analysis of policies along those lenses, there has to be someone thinking about those actions for the system as a whole. And so we talk about that as governance functions. So for us, we think designing your approach to governance should have a few factors in mind. And they are, I would say, values driven. They'll dictate the scope and how the functions manifest themselves. They're also context dependent. So if we think about these sort of values, we would ask you, if you want to achieve equity across a variety of dimensions, what actions do you need to carry out to achieve that? Is it important to you that the people governing your system are highly visible to their constituents? And what's the proximity? And different states have made different choices around this, right? So Pennsylvania has these sort of large, visible, consolidated approaches to governing their programs and systems. That's sort of the cultural norm there. And in different states, like, so for example, North Carolina, there is a value in having things very decentralized at the county level, right? And the purpose of that is for greater proximity. And so different states can make different decisions about the unit of analysis, about the form, which we'll talk about later. But some of these values are guiding the functionality that you design. And so as we look at governance and we think about approaches to governance that sort of both get us to the next phase in the evolution of early childhood systems, but also think about things like dismantling longstanding systems of oppression, they might look different. And stakeholder engagement might also look different. So we wanted to also just take a minute here before we dig into some of the functions that states, territories, and tribal nations will need to have effective governance, to sort of posed some questions, and these are questions that each geography will have to grapple with as they design their functions. So as you go into thinking about what does my governance approach need to do, and what does it need to accomplish, and what are the outcomes that I'm looking for, what are the outcomes that are appropriate to accord to the governance entity or governance approach itself, these are some of the questions and decisions you'll have to make. And so who are the beneficiaries of coherent governance? Is it the workforce? Is it programs? Is it families? How do you get to those stakeholders? How do we define and balance the tension between centralized authority at the state level and consistency in implementation versus proximity to constituents? There doesn't have to be a tension there, but often there is. And then how do we think about equity and redefining systems so that they prioritize the people who have been historically least well supported by these systems? And that means finding a way to get to those constituents who have been iced out of the system or have not been served well, to help them, ask them to help you think about how to redesign the system so that it works better for them. And I think the goal that we want to get to in terms of thinking about functional approaches to governance, and this has come up in many of my conversations with both state and national leaders over the past 2 years, is that a functional approach to governance is hopefully nimble and responsive. It's robust. And so many states had trouble sort of pivoting in real time to addressing the challenges brought up in the system by the COVID-19 pandemic. As we look at things like ARP implementation, how does your governance approach help you think about how to allocate and disperse those resources with equity as a lens? And then is your approach to governance durable, right? So is it going to change from administration to administration? There's always the risk of that, I think. But you know, are there things that you can build into the functions that make sure that there is a sort of a lasting effectiveness, a lasting sort of set of functions that can be carried out even if the structure changes? So here are some of the functions. And again, as Lynn said at the beginning, this is all new thinking, everything from sort of the unit of analysis approach to some of these functions that we're sharing with you, to sort of the 4-step process. We welcome your comments, your critique, your thinking about all of it. But for us, the essential governance functions are things that need to be done or accomplished to achieve system integration. These are distinct conceptually because we wanted to capture the range of functions, but I'm sure you're looking at these and saying, well, how is planning different from allocating? They're related. So a lot of these functions overlap in practice, and we'll try to provide some examples as we go through each. The first is the planning function. So some of this might occur as you decide the unit of analysis, right? Is your state going to have a birth to 5 approach, a pre-K to 3 approach, a birth to 8 approach? And so then what does that look like? Is it going to link into that broader service system, right, with linkages to health and welfare? So some of that planning happens at the unit of analysis level, but there's a lot of planning that goes on throughout the year in an ongoing and periodic manner throughout the life cycle of the governance approach. So we've posed some questions here for you, and we'll give you an opportunity to kind of contemplate some of these questions in small groups later. But what information informs your planning? What sources will you use? Will you engage stakeholders to help you with the planning? Are you building in contingencies to respond to crises or things that come up quickly? And what are the planning functions that happen there? The next is allocating, and we tried to frame these as sort of verbs, action words, right? Things that you need to do. And so this is about resources and the value of those resources. So which resources are allocated to who and for what purpose? And we've divided this here into 2 kinds of resources. So human capital right? You need specific content and technical expertise to carry out the work. And this is a type of human infrastructure. And prior to my current life as a program officer, in doing some research on governance, this is something that a lot of state leaders talk to me about, and something that's sort of very undersold, the fact that it takes time, right? So this is related to the planning function, that you need to actually really think about who the right people are within the governance approach to carry out the work, what that means in terms of resources. And then the fiscal capital is, revenue generation, looking across all of the income or funding sources that the state has, assigning that, and then dispersing it. The next is regulating. This is a baseline function that most states, and we should say, when we say states in the PowerPoint, it is a shorthand for states, territories, and tribal nations, already carry out, right? The most basic example is health and safety regulations. It is a way of according legitimacy to organizations and individuals. So when you think about the authority that the governance approach has, what are the baseline regulations that you want an organization or program to adhere to sort of be legitimate within the early childhood system? It's also, of course, a way of keeping kids safe and healthy. That can also apply to the workforce if you have specific regulations there or programs. And it's a means by which the state can set the foundation for consistency. So beyond this, there may be variability in things that programs are doing, but everybody is at least meeting this foundational bar. This is a function that governance approaches can carry out. The next function is engaging stakeholders. And we want to sort of talk about the technical aspects of this, but also the spirit of stakeholder engagement. Right? We live in the United States. It is a federalist democracy. We have 50+ approaches to thinking about early childhood systems, potentially 50+ approaches to governing. And so stakeholder engagement for us has sort of these technical aspects of who you connect with and why, for what purpose, when are you getting that feedback. But we also want you to think about governance as carrying out sort of that democratic purpose, right? So we think of this as having a rights and a responsibility orientation. So even though we have not ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we could think about the governance approach as instantiating a form of informal rights to kids, families, and the workforce, and then thinking about the responsibilities that come with that. And what is the responsibility of government? One of those is to engage stakeholders and constituents. So some of the decisions that you could make when you're thinking about these functions are how much or how little will you engage with stakeholders, by what means, how proximate will you be to that engagement? And for us, a focus on equity is important here. So really figuring out ways to make connections with people who have not typically been appropriately served by the system is part of this governance function as well. The next is standard setting, and this could happen for programs for children, right? Many of you have early learning and development standards. There are multiple standards for the workforce across states, territories, and tribal nations. There might be multiple standards for the workforce within a geography, depending on whether they're applied to a particular type of program. And so one of the things that the governance apparatus can do is think about a standards aligned approach, aligning across programs. There are multiple ways to do that. I think you all have probably thought about this a lot. And particularly right now, I'm thinking about it a lot for the workforce. So this is a quintessential governance function. The next is monitoring and evaluation. So this is sort of one of, and again, when we say authority and accountability, that sort of crosses all of these functions, but this is probably the most well-articulated function associated with accountability. So some of the questions for you to think about in creating this function for your state is who's being monitored or evaluated? Will you use the results of those monitoring and evaluation processes to guide planning efforts and in turn the allocation of resources. This could be guided by a continuous quality improvement focus for a particular set of programs or for the early childhood system writ large. And then this, garnering this type of data could also help you see who is prioritized within the system. So is there a particular segment of the workforce that's getting more resources or has a particular type of credential? Are there families within specific income brackets that are accessing programs more than others? Are resources being distributed equitably? So these are some of the questions you can ask when building out this function. And the last function is collaborating. So I think the first thing here is there's sort of the technical questions about collaboration. So who do you want and need to work with? Depending on the unit of analysis and scope of what's in your governance approach, you may have departments or programs that are outside of that scope and you need to collaborate across that you don't directly have authority over. But as you're building your approach, you also want to think about programs that you do have authority over and how you can foster collaboration across. And the last thing I'll say about this is here, we also wanted to talk a little bit about the spirit of collaboration as sort of a more transformational aspect of governance functions. So one of the things that we would encourage you to think about in your state is determining the values that guide the collaboration, determining the outcomes of that collaboration. And so, things like, where are your blind spots? Who are you not listening to or not collaborating with? Who do you not have access to that you really need to? This is very related to the outreach and engagement function, but not totally similar. So those are our functions. And we have a lot of comments in the chat, which is great. I was not monitoring them while I talked, but I will take a look. And so the next step really is to, once you've thought about your unit of analysis, thought about your functions, you have the opportunity to learn from others. And so as you're all sort of in this learning community, thinking about governance together, who are the states, territories, tribal nations that you want to learn from? Who has thought a lot about one particular function over another, and where are the ways that you can iterate together? So Lynn's going to talk us through some examples of that now.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. So what do we really mean when we say learning from others? Next slide, please. Obviously, it is our step 3, and we think that before you pick up a pencil to design any kind of a structure, looking and learning from others is really important. Next slide, please. We can learn by reading, we can learn by communicating, we can learn by co-constructing, and we can learn through media and through technology. So fortunately, there are tons of ways that we are able to learn from others' experience. Next slide, please. It's very clear that there are some states, and I would say some countries, that really want to go it alone. Their thesis is, we're really unique. Nobody understands us. We need our very own process. It's in our DNA that we are individualistic and we're going to go it alone. And that is certainly one way to carry out and assess and implement a governance strategy. A second way is what I like to call the copycat approach, and technically in the literature is mimetic isomorphism, but it's the look that says, hey, that looks good. We want it. We really want to do the same thing. Those are both viable options, ways to learn from others. We actually are in love with the little guy in the third picture because we think that learning from others, by definition, is a process of adaptation. That little child is developing something from clay. That's what that icon is designed to show. And you're beginning with some common properties. He's got the clay, but how he shapes it and how you shape your governance strategy is completely contingent on your context. That doesn't mean that we can't learn from others. We can learn about their experiences, often about their processes, so that then we can apply them in our own home context. We believe that each of you, each state will craft its own governance structure, and that you may have some properties that look a whole lot like other states, and you may have some properties that look really, really different. And we actually think that that is good and that is appropriate given the decentralization and the federalist issues that characterize our unique form of government in this country. Next slide, please. So who are the others? Yeah, they can be people, they can be other institutions, they can be other states, but we'd like to share some information from you that perhaps might be a little bit fresh, and that is from other countries. Next slide, please. Through a study that looked at 6 very high performing countries in early childhood around the world, and they are listed here, international colleagues spent time really examining early childhood systems in these countries. They were selected, next slide, please, because they represented different regions of the country, but also different political ideologies. For example, in Finland, there's a big trust in government, and there is a huge commitment to a community ethos. So when you go into a Finnish preschool, it doesn't look at all a high quality one, doesn't look at all like what's going on in Singapore or Australia. But there is very limited monitoring and accountability. We would be aghast. And there is a huge array of public services and choice for families. It fits in with the ethos of that country. Singapore, a country that 30 years ago was in a very different shape than it is in now, is characterized by an incredible spirit of innovation. They really policy borrow from anybody who's doing anything innovative. They scan us all over the country. They are characterized by very rapid, almost universal service expansion, and they pilot, they innovate, and then they implement. They have a very unique approach to governance. In Australia, where there is a very big commitment to diversity and to honoring Indigenous and immigrant populations, a spirit of egalitarianism and social justice prevails. And everywhere you go, in every aspect of, be it their curriculum framework, be it their regulations, that undergirds everything they are doing. The point of this is that the major finding from this study is that context really does contour the strategies, and it contours the nature of governance. So we believe that the lesson from here is that while we can borrow some lessons and processes from other states or other countries, that we are in the business of crafting our own governance structure that will honor our context. Next slide, please. The second lesson to be learned is that all of these countries that are doing a very good job with early childhood education really understand that the infrastructure matters. And they have taken some of the initial formulations about what constitutes infrastructure and broadened it out and presented it in these 5 pillars. I'd like to, for the purposes of this conversation, though, talk about what they're doing in terms of governance, because it's strikingly A, interesting, and B, quite different. Next slide, please. So in these 6 countries, we saw different structures. England and Finland have consolidated their services within a single ministry. I'm not talking about structure here, and I'm going to come to functions in a minute, but they have placed all childcare and early education services under the auspices of their existing ministries of education. It's becoming a very prominent strategy. Several countries have maintained 2 ministries, but they delineate the responsibilities very, very clearly. They keep some services within ministries of health and welfare and other services within ministries of education. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Singapore, progenitor of innovation, has developed an entirely new entity, which they call their Early Childhood Development Agency, which sole raison d'etre is to oversee the implementation and the quality of early childhood education and care services. Next slide, please. Australia and Hong Kong, although they haven't developed new structures, have developed what in the literature we refer to as boundary spanning mechanisms. These are mechanisms that actually durably over time create coordinating bodies that review the functions and that make sure that the functions are being articulated and handled for diverse programs by diverse ministries. And then in all of the countries, actually, we see very short-term entities that are set up to handle some of this design work around coordination, or to tackle how are we going to implement a new policy, or how are we going to implement a new curricular framework. They're time-bound and they're layered on top of the more durable structures that exist in the countries. So a short-term coordinating mechanism is not to be confused with what is a durable structural entity. Next slide, please. But what's also interesting is that these countries focused on functions. They all had very different units of analysis. They took care to define it. And you see that in Australia, they use long daycare and occasional care for children 0 to 5. I don't need to read all this. You get the idea that they think about their units of analysis and they don't look the same in these countries. In addition, the countries have really taken to stock looking at these key functions and are thinking quite hard about how they are going to provision for all of them. So we are indebted to some of these countries for some of these ideas and processes. Next slide, please. The key point that we want to make is that you can have functional alignment and have structural separation. For us, what matters is that the functions are aligned. I want to take the example of South Korea, which according to some has the most well-developed approach to early childhood in the world. They have got a common curriculum that is used no matter where a child 0 to 5 is. It doesn't matter the label on the door, it is used. They engage teachers in the same teacher training, no matter where that teacher ends up teaching. They have a tiered system of credentials that is uniform across the entire country. And everybody who is going to work with young children participates, albeit to different levels, but it's all very clearly explicated and people know what their pathways are and know where they are going. They also have a monitoring system that collects data and analyzes it across the different ministries. So the point that we want to make is that our call to focus on functions is not sort of pie in the sky, but it really suggests that if the functions are aligned, you don't necessarily have to fully rearrange the chairs on the Titanic. You can keep your ministries if indeed there are these connections that transcend them. Next slide, please. So what are our lessons? Our lessons that at least we think we've learned are that learning from others doesn't mean we do what they do. What we each do is contoured by our context, and I think there are two different kinds of context. One is our socio-cultural context, which is our heritage, our values, the things that transcend eras. The economic and political context is a bit more flexible, a bit more short term. It changes, catastrophes, COVID, change of political parties influence that context, but both merge together to help frame what we do in early childhood. The next lesson is that there is not a design that will fit everybody. We cannot be copycatters, but that everybody has got to really think hard about how they are going to address their functions. And to that end, we'd like to invoke the dictum well known to students of architecture and architects that was coined by Louis Sullivan, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's mentor, that form always follows function. Anytime you're building something, and that's what we are doing, we are building systems, the form, the structure, follows whatever the functions are going to be. So we're obligated to begin to think about functions, and that's why it is our step 2 in the analysis. Okay, now we're going to go to Rebecca to talk about, well, what happens when you get to step 4? What about this design structure?
Thanks, Lynn. So step 4, you've sort of figured out the unit of analysis, right? You've thought about the functions. You've tried to take lessons from others that have similar functionality that you want to build out. And now you've got to put this somewhere, right? So we acknowledge that there has to be a form. Your governance approach has to live somewhere within the governmental structure or public-private partnership that suits your context. But what we observe is that right now in the field, we have sort of an, I would say, overemphasized focus on structure and a really big sort of quagmire of definitional ambiguity. And so form and structure is important to a degree, right? We have a lot of typologies in the literature. You'll hear some of them later this week in the governance track sessions. And those are really useful to sort of define and capture what we have now and the evolving thinking about governance structure in states, territories, and tribal nations. But focusing on form only can be distracting from that governance purpose that we talked about earlier, right? So what's your purpose? What's your goal in terms of creating mixed delivery systems that are affordable, high quality, and equitable in states, hopefully with a workforce that is paid a professional wage. And so form, as Lynn said, should follow function, not the other way around. And we give you these really silly images here for those of you. Hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint now, but if you can't, right, does it really matter what your house looks like? Not so much. It matters more that it gives you adequate shelter, that it keeps you safe and dry, and that it meets your needs, right? So you need a functional place to live. The same would apply. We have a bridge here, right? I always think of the Golden Gate Bridge. I used to live in San Francisco. That suspension bridge was designed with from some very specific needs in mind, right? That wouldn't work in other contexts. So it really only matters that your governance approach is consolidated in the Department of Ed, a standalone, a public-private partnership, if it meets the needs of your state. And so I think that's the question that we want you to think about here is, if you've gone through this process and you've thought about who you want to be within the structure, right? The scope, the ages, and the sort of vertical and horizontal aspects of the unit of analysis. If you thought about the functions, then you think about structure, and we want you to ask yourselves these questions. Is it imbued with the right degree of authority? And does it reflect those parameters of value that Lynn just talked about? So the sociocultural, political, and economic context of the geography. The other things to think about is it boundary spanning in some way? So if you do not have authority over, I'm just making this up, but the K-3 aspect of the early childhood system, how will you collaborate and coordinate with that? How will you access that segment of the system? How will you think about alignment in that monitoring and evaluation and planning set of functions? And is the structure that you've chosen does it fit the functions, or is it limiting? So will you have the capacity to carry out monitoring and evaluation functions? Is the regulatory environment within that governance approach, or is it separate? And if so, how can you do what South Korea did and think about sort of creating this very seamless functionality even across a couple of structures? So we've thrown a lot at you. We have about 20 minutes left in the session, and we would actually like you to experiment with us. As we said, this is sort of, as we've looked at sort of the past, present, and future of governance, we see that the field, I think, has an appetite to dig into this conversation around functions. And we want to give you the opportunity to do that now. So I'm going to I'll go to the next slide and tell you what we're doing. So you're going to have the opportunity to go into breakout rooms and start the process of conducting a functional analysis for, in this case, you all have different contexts, so you can think about your contexts in your breakout groups, but we thought it might be helpful to give you a unit of analysis. So a proposed governance approach that focuses on the early care and education system, birth to age 8. The goal is equitable access to affordable, high quality early learning and care. And we'll assign each group a specific function, and we'll ask you to go through some of these questions. What entities or people carry these functions out now? Who could be carrying out the functions? And who should be carrying out the functions? So we're asking you to sort of imagine all the possibilities of everyone that could do these things, but then sort of narrow them and think about who's the ideal. And these may be people, they may be subgroups, it might be a department, it might, again, form should follow function. So we want you to think about what will work best. We will put all of this in the chat, but in general, you'll be assigned a breakout group. You'll focus on one of the functions. We're going to put in the chat a link to a Word document that you can download that has each of the functions and their definitions and those 3 questions that we just asked you. So what does it look like now? Who could do it and who should do it? And then we'll also put a Jamboard link in the chat. And I'll just do a preview of Jamboard really quickly for those of you who haven't used it. What we're asking you to do is, sorry, it just takes a minute to reshare things in the window. Jamboard is almost like a virtual flip chart. If we were in person and at tables, you would be able to sort of write down your findings, but we're asking you to essentially complete 2 tasks. So take a look at this, think about the functions that you would need. Each group can maybe come back and plan to share one collective learning from their thinking about the function that they were assigned. And then we also invite you to get into the Jamboard and actually edit it. So the way to edit a sticky in Jamboard is you just double click and then you can type whatever you'd like. And we welcome actually questions that you have, things that you liked about this tool, things that you hated about this tool, things that were confusing. If you want to suggest edits for the questions that we've put in there, we're open to anything. But the functional analysis tool, and I will share that with you now, so you can see it. Looks like this. So we've put in some prompts, and you can download this and use it if you find it useful. If you don't find it useful, again, please do give us that feedback. We just ask that you don't disseminate it widely. Before we do that, I did see a question in the chat. and I'll read it out loud. So Judy asks, could you speak to the challenges in building effective early childhood infrastructure with governance oversight and the challenges in doing so due to the political atmosphere or leadership? Suggestions. Linda, you have immediate thoughts? You want to go first?
I want to say that that's, in light of our thesis, it's a really hard question to answer because contexts vary so very, very much. So if you are dealing with a supportive political atmosphere, then indeed you're going to be able to move with much more expeditiously. If you are dealing with a very controversial and confrontational political structure, that's going to impede things dramatically. I think we'd both be delighted to talk with Judy and anybody else who would be so interested, but it's hard to generalize. That's sort of the point of what we're trying to say here. You all have got different existing platforms now for your governance structure. You've got different contexts and you're going to marry those. You've also got different units of analysis that you might want to use. You're going to probably marry those and come up with something that is very, very unique. Just one more sub comment I would make, and that is that I do think this is such an opportune time to be thinking about governance, in that new funds are going to be coming down. There are going to be all kinds of new opportunities. And in some cases, the new funding streams may complicate what we've already got. In other cases, they may provide us opportunities to do inventive work. So the answer to the question in my mind, and it's not terribly satisfying, I recognize, but it is sort of an it depends. While I got the floor, I would just like to say one thing additionally, that the worksheet that you have got is very, very preliminary, but we encourage you to use it as you are traversing the horizontal band that relates to the group that you to which you have been randomly assigned. And I believe there is one Jamboard sheet for each group too. Am I correct on that? So that, yeah, when you do your notes, go to your own Jamboard sheet. And we would welcome Jamboard comments about the content or about the process.
All right, I've put the Jamboard link, the link to the functional analysis matrix in the chat. I've also put in, it looks like we've had a few people drop off during the session. So we have a small number of people. So I don't think we'll have more than 7 breakout groups, but depending on what you're assigned to, just focus on that function. So I think we're ready to go, and maybe we'll just do 10 minutes in breakouts since we're a little bit behind, and then just get as far as you can. And we'll leave the Jamboard open actually for the next few days. So if you think of things as you are, in your spare time tonight, when I know you want to think about early childhood governance, or as you go through the other sessions throughout the week, which will really actually highlight a lot of the new thinking and new governance approaches happening in states too. So there could be some applicability here. All right, so without further ado, let's get into some breakout rooms.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks, Martha, on the rooms. You on cue, you got everybody out. That was great.
That's great.
No problem. Yeah, and it ended up being the perfect 7 groups, 3 to 4 people, nice and small because we only have a few minutes. So it worked out.
Looks like room 7 only has Hawaii. Colleen.
Should I move them to a different room?
Yeah. I declined. You could remove them to room 4.
Let me do that. Got it.
That was, I just ate up every bit of what you all presented. That was so good.
I hope it's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it is helpful to them. We, I think, struggled with this because there's so much in here. It could have been a whole, week-long seminar or whatever, where, they, had more time to really ask questions, dig in, process. And so it's just a taste, and hopefully it's useful to them.
And hopefully we'll get feedback on this new approach, the 4 steps, and see what they think. I mean, we indeed will probably refine it. This is not kind of the end of this, right?
Yeah, I liked the frame. Seems to make a lot of sense to me. I think I told you I was the executive director for Oklahoma's State Advisory Council, and Oklahoma is not not joined with hardly any programs. So we had to think about how to work together. And I wish I could go back and work with Oklahoma with this frame. That I think
Nice, thank you.
really, provides some considerations that perhaps we didn't always take. So I appreciated that.
Did the unit of analysis, the parts in here that were new were the unit of analysis and the functions. Did those sections make sense to you?
They did. I was thinking I would have to, that's an area where I would have to sit down with folks and think about, so what does that mean for us in our state?
Yeah. Exactly. And the unit of analysis are going to be totally different.
Yes.
No matter where we are, but hopefully that as step 1, you can't get anywhere if you don't have the clarity on that, I don't think. So.
Right. And I think by defining some of that, you get past the, so what are you doing? Are you doing anything? Maybe it begins to give some structure to your work and a way to communicate about it. Whereas the folks that kind of just glaze over, oh yeah, right. You're focused on the system, and I even learned to a lot of families, system doesn't have a good connotation. And so I learned to be a little bit careful when we talk public facing about the system, because families are like, I don't want to get in the system and they go to the child welfare system kind of connotation. And I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, language matters, right? So it's a little bit of a different example, but when I was working in Pennsylvania, we tried to say practitioner instead of provider, right? Because it was service provider and there's a connotation to that. So I just tried to say practitioner or educator. And actually across all the different Pennsylvania regional keys, right, which is the implementation arm of OCDEL, tried to get everyone using the same language to try to socialize a norm so that there was consistency across, to try to, just try to build that credibility of early childhood teachers. So it does matter in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think it's good too. We have a lot of the PDG staff, TA staff in this too. So if you all, you all are closest to the states. If you all have feedback for us too on what would be most useful, what's useful about this, what's not. We're not sensitive about critiques. We can take them. So
Well, Harriet is my direct supervisor because I work for ICF, and then of course Missy. I see Lori's here, Lori Connors Tater. So we've got some great folks that we could put our heads together with.
I think we would actually welcome that. So
there's a couple people from the states I support. Let me just look right now. I think they, yeah, there's one person from one of the states in Region 4 that I support. So I'll be curious to talk with her afterwards too.
I just gave everyone a 2-minute warning. We have one populated sticky in the Jamboard, which is something I think we're just don't have enough time, which is okay.
Yeah.
The tech stuff got us in the beginning.
and the half-hour business.
So yeah, so it's just, I don't know why that happened with the PowerPoint. That's never happened to me before on Zoom. It's weird.
Want to monitor the feedback, Rebecca?
Mhm.
Now, if we run too tight on time, I can just put a couple things in the chat.
I think we should bring them back. It's only if we've got to end it at 5. I'm dying to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, I want to give you that time. Don't worry about
We
me.
have to have a hard stop at 5. Can we go to like 5:10 or?
We might lose a few people, but well, Martha, let me ask you that. Can we go later?
I think we can. I mean, the next session doesn't start until 5:30, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Y'all can go as long as you want, as long as there's still people here.
We'll see. We'll see if people can stay a couple extra minutes and respect if they can't.
Right. We're pulling them back.
Yeah, let's go ahead and, do I just click this close all rooms?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And it says they close in 60 seconds, but usually people come back before
Yeah.
that thing is up.
Lively conversations. I can tell.
Are
They're
they?
not coming back early.
Oh, that's a good sign.
That is a good sign.
Yeah, we're getting some comments in the Jamboard. So
Oh,
that's
good. It's a big, different way of thinking. It takes time.
Hi, everyone. We apologize for the insufficient time to grapple with these massive questions in breakout rooms, but that's what happens during Zoom meetings and actually every conference and class I've ever been in. So we'll just acknowledge that this is a big topic that we could have spent many hours and days on, and you will have the opportunity to join additional sessions this week where you can think about this more and hear from people doing the work and thinking about this as well. And we have a few comments in the Jamboard. Lots of thinking around engaging stakeholders and focusing on values there. Thinking about sort of different cultural leaders and others. And we have some comments too in the collaboration section. So thank you for those of you who had the chance to do that. We'll leave that open. You can continue to pop thoughts in there if you're so inclined. And we are about at time, but we are willing to stay a few minutes later if you are, respecting you might have to or need a break and want to sign off. You're welcome to do that. But if you wanted to verbally share any of your thoughts or give us feedback, we would welcome that as well. So we'll just open it up for some concluding questions or thoughts, if anything comes up for you.
Would you like people to just raise their hands or indicate they'd like to speak?
Or just come off mute and we'll
Yeah, it's so
call
good
on
to
you.
see everybody. Hi.
Well, I'll give a little feedback from my group because I don't think Wendy and Pauline stayed on. Are you there, Wendy and Pauline?
Yes.
We've got it. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Okay. So please go ahead. You know, I mean, I have heard the information before, but maybe not all together. And it was really compelling and really important to have the history and then outlining some of the key concepts, which we talked about, and I'm going to have Wendy and Pauline say a little bit more, but particularly defining the unit of analysis and then thinking about the, you know, the functions. And we had a little short conversation about the fact we couldn't get too into the details of the functional analysis, but just the idea of thinking about it functionally versus programmatically, we believed is the right approach because it has the potential to break down the silos. So we didn't get that far, to be honest, with it in terms of the specific questions, but it's felt like, and Pauline was really thrilled to have the information. I don't want to speak for them, but you gave us a lot of food for thought, as always.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lori.
I have one thing I can share.
Yeah.
You already heard my confession. It was just me, Chris, and Krista for and so we just talked about California. So we didn't really do the assignment, but we had a good talk. But I did want to share that I have been working with the state, and we on this issue of helping people to understand functions. So we spent a lot of time. Deborah knows a little bit more about this work, you know, on this issue, but it's also been interesting to me in trying to work through with a mixed group of people who are in different roles in government and out, is also challenging them to ask what are they think the key functions are that are related to their purposes in trying to think about governance. And I just wanted to share that, you know, for anyone here who is currently involved in their own deliberations or thinking about that, you know, and sort of that issue of pushing people themselves and not just a set, which I think it's great, Rebecca, what you and Lynn presented, and they're the standard set, right, that we all use, but also saying to people, you have to still think about your context and purpose, right, as you're trying to do the planning in terms of, are these things all applicable? And also, are there other functions in that context that are going to be critical to identify and to really think about in terms of your approach and design and all of that?
Yep. That's right. And like one example that pops to mind is some of the, you know, language and culture preservation and revitalization that's going on, right, with tribal nations. And so thinking about just that one aspect of the system that's really important and has been historically completely overlooked or totally taken out by policy. What are the functions that are needed, you know, to achieve that, right? And so that's just one example of many where we think about this context being really important. So I appreciate that. And glad you got to have a California focused conversation because we know there's a lot happening in that state right now.
If we can engage in conversation a little bit, I do think that is a really helpful suggestion, Harriet. And in addition, I do wonder if there are not certain functions that are inherent to the definition of a system that you can't have a system without. So you've given me, fuel for thinking about that. Are there functions that are indeed more essential than other functions that are the sort of the sine qua non of functions? But I do think adaptability and having people identify how they perceive functions is a great addition. Thank you.
And Laura, I appreciate I meant to actually plug the study when I was speaking about functions, because I know that's sort of where you ended up, right? Is thinking about what makes a state office of early learning effective, and it's the functionality rather than a particular structure. So thank you for mentioning that. And I'm
Yes,
sorry that
hi.
I forgot to do it.
I just wanted to make the comment that I really appreciated how you took the unit of analysis all the way up birth through 8 and using the newer definition, because even just our PDG B-5 in our name itself, it takes it up to age 5. So going up to age 8, I thought that was very nice. And I appreciated all the different cultures that were presented and how they address childcare. So I really learned a lot, and I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Pauline.
Thanks, Pauline.
We really welcome criticisms, everybody. This is new.
Yes, we
This is
do.
new territory for us. So
We do.
particularly
So
around the unit of analysis part of it and around the functions.
I'll
And you
add one
can-
more thing, Lynn, on the functions.
Yeah.
So, I still really like that Julia Kaufman's frame around the system. And I think if you took those various C's, that they're not all, but they go across, those things actually each relate in a large scale to a function. So I think that would be interesting for you to take another look at that. You maybe already have, but I think that vocabulary is pretty accessible. And actually it does relate to something Chris and Krista and I were talking about, which is the first one, which is sort of creating the conditions. Do you have a climate? That's not the word she uses, it's some other C word. But basically it's like, that there's some responsibility in the system to have a climate that enables you to do the work. That's the politics and that's that other part. And there's a mobilization to get there. And, what I think that is part of the government function too, on the executive branch side. It's not just the governor's office and the ledge. So that's the only thing, if you're inviting and thinking about this, is maybe to look at that and how that interacts. Because I think, again, that's not necessarily ECE specific so much as, bigger parts that help you locate within whatever you're working on more specific elements.
Thank you. Very helpful. Very helpful.
Appreciate that. So we've kept you a bit over time, and I appreciate your generosity in staying, and we're certainly happy to stay on, but I know you also have something happening after this, and this is the first day of a series. So we'll invite maybe any last questions. And I'm reading the chat, sorry. So can we just say, respect for all of us for doing this for 2 years. It is still just really a lot to toggle between conversations and chats and slides. So thank you all for hanging in there. Appreciate that. Yes, we agree totally. Deeper conversation on the functions. Yeah. To think about greater alignment and coherence, right? And just the goal here, I think, is system in many ways is system integration, right? Because that is one thing that can get us to down the line outcomes for kids and families if it's done well.
Thank you. Thank you. This was
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you, Lynn and Rebecca. And if you'll notice, Missy had a chat somewhere a little bit earlier that we'll be hosting 4 workshops on this topic next year. So stay tuned. So in response to your desire, Pauline, I think there'll be some additional opportunities through the center. So thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. The governance geeks will stay on to the very end. Appreciate Appreciate the presentation, appreciate the conversation, and hope some of you will join our networking session that starts in about 20 minutes. Richard will be there to take any questions at the beginning. So have a good evening. See you all tomorrow, if not later tonight. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Deborah, for
Bye.
coordinating us.
Bye, Colleen. It was good to see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Good to
everyone.
see you too, Rebecca.
Have a great night.
Bye. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lori.
Hi. Bye.
Thank you. You both were just fantastic. And
Oh, well,
Thank
thank you. Hannah, I don't know if you're still on, but Hannah, would you copy down the functions or the Jamboard comments? I'd love to really look at them and study them. And Rebecca, we need to think kind of about our next steps in light of this. And also, Deborah, if you get any feedback, good, bad, boring, dumb, anything, we would really, really welcome it.
appreciate it.
Can you do a formal evaluation of the whole conference? And would we be able to see the part that is pertinent to us?
Yes, yes.
That would be
I'm
very
glad
helpful.
to
Thank
be
you.
able to. Yeah.
Great.
So you want a list of who attended and the evaluation. Anything else in feedback?
Just
Yeah, feedback, and let us know if you need things from us. You have the Jamboard links and the
And I have the slide deck. Yeah.
and the slide deck. So if anything else arises, or if for some reason those links expire before you can download them, just let me know and I'll just send you things directly or refresh it. But they should be accessible to people at least through the week.
Okay.
two
All right.
quick things. Number one, we would hope that you would share it in PDF because it's very rough.
Yes.
And speaking to the roughness of it, Rebecca, I actually have some comments that if I were doing this again tomorrow, what I would change. So
Well,
we probably take notes to each other.
and just so you'll know, we're not actually posting the slide decks.
You're not.
So they'll be in the context of your recorded, but so I will have them. If for any reason, I will let you know if I do share them with anybody. And
Okay.
yes, PDF, definitely.
Great, great, great.